Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony, and thank you, Lexi, for the introduction. Very generous. I wanted to start just very brief background about me personally. I am a physicist, not a software engineer. For anyone who knows me, that becomes abundantly clear pretty early on. But I have been working and leading teams in software development and product and so on for a little while. So I'm trying to impedance match to that world, and maybe some people here can attest to progress there. I will say that recently I've gotten a lot more comfortable with things because if you look at LLM outputs, the non-determinism there and their general kind of predictability within an envelope of unpredictability smells a lot like quantum mechanics. So to me, that's really good stuff. It makes a lot of sense. To all of you, maybe has some new challenges. So today, I thought what I would do is go through a bit of the history of what I've been doing, including with a bunch of key people that are here, and under the theme, trouble. Trouble that scientists like me can cause engineers like you. Now, we're at a very interesting time, right? Because speaking of trouble we can cause, I can go find 8 or 10 lines of Python, or maybe a little bit more, and create what looks like kind of a pretty capable application, right? Sort of, kind of. I mean, that's where the trouble begins, isn't it, right? It's really easy to put something together that looks pretty compelling, but behind the scenes, there's all sorts of the usual challenges and all sorts of new ones as well. So with that as kind of a theme, and you could look at that last line. I'll get to that at the final slide or two of the talk. I wanted to talk about 3 major areas. First, accelerating scientific discovery. Second, experience launching a quantum computing business. And I'm not going to be very business-oriented. I'm going to talk more about the tech. And then I'll leave off with talking about open source AI, a little bit of the general landscape as I see it, and then what a number of organizations are brewing up to try to really support the community in a much more forthright fashion here. First, science. Now, if you know science, one perspective and lens on it is that it is an excellent big data and AI problem. Because the problems of science, the scale of data collected in experiments, the scale of the space you need to explore to find, for example, a compound that's active as a potential drug is enormous, right? Far more than you can probe directly or even sample efficiently since there's so many unknowns. Science hit us in its importance pretty hard during the pandemic. That's when this particular program really ramped up at IBM. But the perspective here is science is a really great application area for AI technologies in particular. So let's start with some interesting progress here. Now, it's very possible, and many people are now working on applying generative techniques to molecular discovery, in particular using generative modeling to predict molecules that are active against certain targets or prime targets, using generative AI to predict properties of prospective molecules that could be useful, replacing the direct kind of HPC-style simulations with AI as a proxy for that, or mixed versions of that, protein folding, property prediction, and many other things. There's a lot of great progress here, and IBM has taken a significant role in some parts of this. You can see some snapshots here of some of the generative modeling work that we've done in finding molecular candidates, especially for timely challenges, including a few years back in the race to find treatments for COVID. Now, this is all open source, by the way, and much of what you see here, almost all of the software that I'm going to talk about here is open source. That's a theme. It's very important to IBM. And you'll see that's going to extend very strongly into the future with open source AI. Here's another interesting example. This is using AI approaches to now say you have a molecule that you think is useful. Now you want to synthesize it, right? So you can come up with recipes. You can come up with reaction predictions. You can actually deploy that directly in an automated fashion to a tool to build molecules. So that's really interesting stuff, and it's also some of the transcription from the pure digital world to the physical world. Now, earmark that, because there's a lot of learning there, which I'm going to come back to when people start to talk about these existential threats of AI, right, especially in creating bioweapons and the like. That's not so easy. We'll get to that, though. Now, this is great. We could go through science papers and results all day, but this is, of course, an engineering audience. So the question is, how do you make this into a product? How do you make it robust? How do you make it useful across many use cases? How do you handle all the details in practice? So if you think about an exemplary use case in a nutshell of the space of things, so drug discovery is actually a good canonical use case to represent the challenges and opportunities. Today, that is a very manual process. There's multiple different scientist persona types involved, engineering, huge amounts of lab work. The top flow represents very roughly how that works. Huge amounts of hands-on, huge amounts of manual iteration, takes multiple years and lots of money. If you can infuse AI and automation in different parts of that, including in the replacing some laboratory methods with in-silicon methods, and augmenting and accelerating some lab methods that are going to be needed no matter what, the promise is that you can accelerate that significantly. Lots of challenges there. Data challenges, compute challenges, tracking and ops challenges, user experience challenges, many, many interesting problems. We put a lot of work into building out a science platform to try to address these sorts of use cases. And there was a lot of interesting work at the infrastructure level, at kind of science-oriented platform services level, and targeting a few different use case areas that were important and are important in science. Now I'm going to show you a little snapshot of one kind of app here, that version of synthesis automation in production. This is a service that we have out and a lot of scientists use. It has been fairly successful. This is not a billion-user application, right? This is more of a very specialist application. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of resonance, right, in using digital methods to replace what to date has been very hands-on, very manual, very in the lab, experimental, pure experimental, trial and error type of approaches. Two people in the audience are going to tell you more about this. So both Dean and Carl are right up here up front. They have talks later today. So you're going to hear more about the evolution of this platform, and you'll hear more about engineering challenges in bringing the worlds of software engineering and science together. All right, so that was an intro. Hang on tight, because we're going to switch gears to quantum computing, which is really different and a little bit crazy. So we're going to start by relaxing a basic assumption: ones and zeros. It's so abstracted we rarely even maybe think at this level anymore, but forget about keeping track of state. Quantum computing eliminates state as a deterministic concept. So that's a lot of fun. Now, what do we mean? OK, obviously, classical computing. And yes, we're calling it classical computing. I know that may sound quaint to you all, but yes, physicists like me call it classical computing. Let that sink in for a second. Classical computing is based on ones and zeros. It's based on logic at the low level. You all know that. Quantum computing is based on something called the qubit, which is a richer version of storing information that can occupy a quantum state that's a superposition between 1 and 0, and where one qubit can be entangled in a very strange and interesting way with another, where its state depends on the other. And before you go and measure it, right, think about calling an API to look at the state. It doesn't exist. So don't worry about keeping track of state. Not so simple, obviously. Remember back to that analogy I started with, there's an envelope of predictability that propagates through, is the basis of computation, whereas specific measurements and processes don't have determinism. How does this work in practice? There are quantum gates, which are classical, or analogs to classical gates, and there's a concept called a quantum circuit, which is kind of a primitive program construct that you should keep in mind, because that's really the building block that you're going to program a quantum computer with. What does it look like? So you have these strange gates that can take what look like normal bits, ones and zeros, and create them as these mixed superposition states. You have other bits that can entangle them. So that's this little connector with the plus sign, a C0 gate. And then you've actually got measurement gates. So remember, until you go and probe it, this physical qubit, it doesn't exist in a specific state because you've just introduced it in this indeterminate state. In between that, you can actually construct quantum logic, quantum algorithms, to do potentially interesting things. Now, You might think, well, how does this manifest in practice with a developer? The tack that the industry has started to adopt, and IBM is all in on this, is to try to infuse these low-level quantum constructs into known abstractions so that you can use similar tools, you can program the way you know. You do have to learn some new concepts within that. So that's the general take. So you can use your good old friendly Python code with some new constructs to build these programs. You can so we've built up a lot of the software infrastructure and computing infrastructure to do this. And you actually can get started relatively easily. You do have to learn some of these concepts, like what a quantum circuit can do in the context of running a quantum algorithm. And then underlying that is a lot of really good engineering that Carl here in the audience in particular was a significant part of, and maybe he'll tell you about during a break. Lots of interesting quantum platform engineering challenges there. The idea is to present this circuit-based abstraction. So you can think about a primitives library that has building blocks that you can build circuits with, and you have sub-circuits such as the ones listed here. We won't go through all of this in detail, but this is a key way that we have tried to make quantum understandable, digestible, and usable. Again, just to mention again, this is all open source software. This is part of what we call Qiskit, which is an open source framework in Python, primarily for programming quantum computers. It's a whole quantum platform and infrastructure story behind the scenes here. Again, very interesting how we take the world of qubits, right, which are these physical devices that, that behave quantum mechanically, and then match and fuse that into classical infrastructure in an accessible fashion. We have a quantum cloud. You're seeing some resources in that quantum cloud. Think of these as so these are accessible quantum resources you can use to run your quantum programs. And then, in the theme of bringing it to the application, here's a fun demo, bringing quantum computation to your favorite spreadsheet program. And you could keep in the back of your mind, in a few years, are we going to see AI-generated quantum accelerated pivot tables as our killer app here? Maybe. I don't know about that. All right. Hey, it's real. People use this stuff. It's got close to 500,000 registered users. Active users are obviously a subset, but there's about 4 billion API executions a day, pretty steadily, and steadily growing. Alexei mentioned our partner network and our community efforts. Huge amount of activity here. Wish I could go into it. We can talk about it, during the break maybe. But this is a very active program, but it is a long-term program. It is something that is definitely still on a 5 to 10-year horizon toward productive use. All right, so final subject, open source AI, which we'll call the latest challenge or opportunity, depending on how you see it. What is clear, something that you all know, the community really wants open source tools and open source models for generative AI, for foundation model-based AI. You've seen incredible popularity of some of the open source projects. A couple of them are represented here, Llama for pre-trained models and LangChain for application orchestration. So there's a lot of demand, and you might convince yourself, well, things will work out fine. We know the story in open source. You get community focus, you get resources, you get some big companies on board to help. But things are a little bit different here. The primacy of pre-trained models as a compute construct, right, as an abstraction concept, is changing a lot of things. It obviously changes application architectures and many, many things around that. Many things you probably know. There's a tutorial yesterday around this. But if you think about, take a step back and ask, well, is open source just going to work here? Well, there are some new challenges, right? The state of affairs is that open source AI, especially at the model level, is vibrant. But the state of affairs is that proprietary models are still better. They're still more capable. Now, will that naturally change? Maybe. But you can make an argument that things are a little bit different here. With pre-trained models as the primary construct of an open source-based technology, you have new bottlenecks, especially resource bottlenecks. It takes huge amounts of compute, in particular, large amounts of curated data to make these things and to maintain them. So there's some new challenges here as well. Another lens is policy, which we'll get into in just a second. There are some new challenges and headwinds along with the open source opportunities. And this is a bit of a foreshadowing. You're going to see more and a more focused effort among organizations in the community in this area soon. IBM and others are very active here in trying to figure out how we solve some of these relatively newer bottlenecks, especially the resource challenges. I wanted to just mention a few pieces of the story. This is, again, part of a broader whole that we're going to be rolling out along with others in the coming months. But there are some interesting projects on the frontier here. Here is one in principle-based alignment. So this is essentially how you can use natural language-based principles, to align a model not just for safety and ethics, but also to brand values, to product use case space. And here is something that is also very interesting. You may appreciate that mixture of experts approaches versus dense LLMs are kind of the frontier. It seems to be what GPT-4 is based on. IBM has been particularly active here. We've open sourced some early work, and we intend to engage community to build this up in a much stronger fashion. And if you think about this, the modularity here allows for extensibility to different subdomains of knowledge that are very technical. Think back to that science, the science problem space. There's lots of science-specific technical knowledge that is natural language-like, but not quite. And then there's obviously new modalities that need to be extended here. So this is some interesting work that we're planning to go much bigger on in the near future. This is just kind of an example of how this can work, the ability to add, subtract, pare down these sorts of modular models. And you can therefore adapt to a specific use case context, specific deployment context, and so on. OK, in this space, though, scientists are not the biggest troublemakers. We have new troublemakers. The policy realm and the public discourse, and I don't know if you've noticed, is a little charged. And there are some significant headwinds to open source technologies in AI, especially open source models. Now, there are various conversations, discussions, regulatory efforts happening globally, but you should pay attention to this. You should weigh in when you can, because there are some players in the tech industry that would like and benefit from keeping AI closed. So I'll leave it at that. And in closing, I want to come back to one more point. In that big list of where the trouble begins, when people like me can use a few lines of Python to maybe sort of create a toy app and give you guys a lot of trouble, there's one big one that we're all talking about. Am I contributing to an existential risk? So let's just dive in a slight bit deeper. Some people are worried that Gen AI is going to lead to humanity's demise. How do we think that might happen? People are talking about AI helping to build nuclear weapons, bioweapons, some sort of malicious nanomachine army, or a big army of killer robots. All right, should you be worried about this? Well, I'm going to put my scientist hat back on here. And if you've all ever worked in a lab or a complex manufacturing environment, it's pretty tough. The recipe to build a virus, the recipe to build a nano-based piece of technology, never mind a nuclear weapon, that's not the hard part. The hard part is actually building it. Building it, getting the materials, engineering it, testing it, right? That's not so easy. If you've ever been in a lab, it usually doesn't work for years. That's why a PhD takes years for even a small incremental progress to build anything at a physical level. So AI will not cause the extinction of the human race. The bottlenecks are not the existence of better recipes to follow. And if you don't believe me, go try to build something. Good luck. So keep coding, fix real problems. You're welcome from a scientist. Oh, questions. Yeah, OK, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Anthony, for the great keynote. So I'm curious, like, what's on top of your mind to make, open source AI a reality? What do you think is the direction of the next year?
Yeah, so if you think about what's happening in open source AI, there's like a huge amount, right? There's something like 350,000 open source models on Hugging Face right now and growing all the time. There's lots of organizational level interest. But I think if you think about the history of open source and how like open source software was catalyzed, there is a big role to play for industry and for organizational level cooperation. If you think about what Linux took to really kind of win out, it took a huge amount of investment, collaboration, focused effort, along with obviously a really robust individual level community effort. So I think if you look at the present, there are some analogies, and I do think that organizations like IBM and many others need to step up and directly support in a much bigger fashion the open community that's building the leading edge of Gen AI in the open.
So speaking of existential threats, one of the worries about quantum is it'll be used to break all of our encryption protocols, although they've got quantum safe ones now. Do you believe that's a real problem? And if not, are there other problems we should worry about with quantum?
So, do I believe it's a real problem to solve? Yes, but it's a problem whose horizon is a ways out, and we have plenty of time to solve it, and we know how to solve it. There are better encryption techniques that we know how to implement. At this point, it's a significant engineering challenge, but there's not a science challenge in how to protect against, far future quantum attacks.
So these days, AI is putting so much carbon in the atmosphere, do you think that quantum somehow gonna help to kind of think more about the impact that all of these kind of people looking for GPUs are putting there?
So that's a great question, which I'll take a kind of personal stab at answering. I personally don't believe quantum, even though as much I'd love if this was the case, I don't believe it's going to significantly move the needle on reducing carbon impact of compute. And that's because quantum will really be for a long time a use case specific acceleration methodology, right? The ramp in AI workloads is going to far surpass any negative contribution from that in the total carbon profile for a long time.